Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Quigley on Divorce, a behind-the-scenes look. I'm joined again today by my partner, Jordan Rosenberg, new fellow to the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. Very proud of him. Huge accomplishment. Congrats.
Thanks, James. It's awesome.
So we've got a topic today that we're not making light of any parenting issue by any stretch of the imagination, but the whole podcast is to give you a behind the scenes look, right? To give you some perspective that as a lay person, a litigant, someone thinking about divorce, nobody really knows what goes on. Some people go on the internet and they look at stuff and they get some information that way. But really what we're hoping to do is really give you some sense of what happens with a very limited, specific parenting issue. So when we talked about this, we came up with a couple of different names for what we're going to name the podcast. I particularly like the name One Night Fight. And what was the one that you came up with, Jordan?
The overnight fight.
The overnight fight.
Right.
And so to give some context of what that is about is, and let me back up. So I've been doing this a long time. When I started practicing in the early 90s, it was almost unheard of that a non-custodial parent, meaning in those days, kind of typically the father, he would get any more parenting time than an overnight on Friday and Saturday every other weekend, and then would have a dinner with the kids after school on a Wednesday.
Right.
90% of the cases would happen that way. I remember one of my first trials, represented a gentleman, and I got him a 9-5 schedule, meaning he had 5 overnights out of every 14 instead of the normal 2. And it was like
Explosion.
Right. It was like record breaking, unheard of. So I was very proud of that accomplishment. Now it's completely swung to the other way, that you're you never see an every other weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Wednesday dinners.
Yeah, never.
Hardly
I mean,
ever.
it's that's certainly the exception to the rule. And these days, it's always like, and I guess even backing up even further. So the law changed in 2016 or around then, which kind of got rid of the child support laws, and the child support laws changed where we moved from more of a percentage base to an income shares. And the legislature imposed this sort of like arbitrary 146 overnight rule where it was like you get a big discount in your child support if you get 146 overnights.
Yeah.
So that's when these concepts of these 9-5, 8-6, 50-50 kind of came into play, because really the 9-5 schedule, which is sort of what you were talking about, James,
Yep.
gets you with the standard holiday schedule to about 146 overnights.
Which then triggers the child support discount.
Correct.
Yep.
And as you go higher and higher, to the extent that it's even 50-50, you get even a higher discount.
Yeah.
So anything over 146, you get this big discount.
Right.
So I think what we were talking about when we were preparing for this, it's like, instead of the plug and chug, dads get every other weekend with Wednesday.
Yeah.
Sort of the floor, absent any sort of extenuating circumstances or abuse or kind of special personality characteristics or special needs with kids and stuff, it's sort of that 9-5 schedule. And like the minimum now is like, kind of start the case like, okay, well, mom's the primary caretaker, dad works, it's good. So, okay, let's just plug them into this 9-5 thing. And that's generally a Thursday overnight into an every other weekend through Monday morning. So you get the full weekend, Friday through Monday morning. And what we like to do is we like to kind of do a Thursday, which abuts that weekend, gives you a nice long weekend. Obviously depends when, age of the kids and stuff, but that's really kind of the new every other weekend with the Wednesday dinner.
Right. And you still get to why I called it the one night fight, because the 9-5 could also be a 10-4, meaning what the one night fight often ends up being is Sunday night. Do the kids come back to the primary residential home Sunday night, or do they just get dropped off at school the next day?
Right.
But to back up and give some context to this. So I'm a father of 4. Jordan's a father of 2. I think the societal recognition of a father's role in raising children has evolved. And I think there's been a lot of advocacy at the legislative level to saying, wait a minute, even to the point where I think twice now it's been proposed, it hasn't passed the legislature here in Illinois, but the concept of saying, wait a minute, we should start every case with mom and dad having, or the parents having 50-50 time. And then either parent comes in and advocates why it should be less than 50, but they've been advocating to have a legal presumption that it starts at 50-50.
Yeah.
Wildly different in the 33 years that I've been doing this. And there's good and bad in everything.
Right.
And so I think what we want to get to and what we really want to talk about is, because to be honest, we've had our conversations as fathers and we've sort of joked about it. And I know in my years of marriage, raising the 4 kids, you go through your ups and downs. And, I remember thinking, oh man, if I ever get divorced, I'm going for custody of the kids.
Right.
I'm going to get,
right.
And then I look at it now and it's like, there's no way I would have, realistically, what would I have done raising 4 kids? My wife has done a wonderful job with that, but you sort of get caught up in this fight, and it's oftentimes not even really about the kids. And so we're not saying dads or moms or other parents should have more or less rights over the other. It's really not about that. I think we genuinely believe that all parents have a very, very important and significant role in raising children and giving them the best opportunities. But what really makes sense? And what makes sense is often, in our experience, lost in the fight between the parents.
Yeah.
One parent is angry. One parent wants to get back at the other parent. One parent recognizes that the other parent is heavily invested as the kind of primary stay-at-home parent, and I'm going to manipulate that to get a financial gain.
Right.
But then we also want to have in this discussion the comparison about what are you really fighting for and how much is that costing you in actual dollars and further devastation and negative impact that cascades down on your children.
Right, right. And I think, and that's really the issue, is like, how much are you willing to spend for what gain? And I think if you kind of phrase it in a way where it's like, well, I'll spend anything on my kids to make sure that I have that time. That's fair, right? But at the end of the day, I think for us, as lawyers who deal with these clients who are dealing with all these parenting stuff, it's like, it takes our clients to get to that point, to see that objectively. Takes them a while, and it's hard. When you're talking about like, well, you got to give up an extra night with your kids, and we really a lot of times can't give our clients a good reason why that's the case. You know what I mean? So for example, if it's like let's say that we have a dad, and we have a dad who's banging on the table and says, well, I want 50-50. I want 50-50.
I'm a great dad.
I'm a great dad. And there, no doubt, great dad, no doubt you should get 50-50 under certain circumstances. Like there's no reason why you wouldn't have 50-50, right? So the question is what are you going to do and how much are you going to spend to sort of prove that point?
Right.
And let's say the whole case goes away if you take one less overnight, right? The one night fight over a 14-day period, right? Does it impact your children's lives? Does it impact your relationship with the kids? Does it make sense is it really going to benefit your kids incrementally more if they're sleeping with you at your house, basically an extra 20, bad at maths, 26 times in a year, if that, right? And that discounting all the holidays and summer, whatever. So it's like, you can read their book one more time every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? And so a lot of the times, and I think maybe I'm taking your thunder, but it's hard to have these conversations with our clients where it's like, okay, you know what? Just agree to something less because it's going to get it done. There's no other real good reason what we can give you. You're not a bad dad. You're not a bad mom. You're whatever. It's just that's what's going to get it done.
Yeah.
Right.
And let's back up. So let us kind of boil this down to how this starts and how it ends. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the scenario basically starts, husband and wife, for this hypothetical, let's call it, are about to get divorced or they're getting divorced. And in this hypothetical scenario, let's say dad was the primary wage earner. Mom worked part-time while the kids were in school, but didn't make a lot, kind of worked around the kids' school schedule, was always there to get them after school, get them the snacks, made sure their homework was done, got them to the activities. Dad got home, sometimes maybe not even for dinner because he's working late. And then the weekends roll around and, dad's for the most part off on the weekends. And so as a family, they're going to the kids' games together or events together or the play dates and dad takes one child here, mom takes one child there, go to church together, go to synagogue together, do whatever they do. And all of a sudden the chaotic weekend is over, back to the routine.
Right.
Now we're getting divorced. Okay. And so inevitably, mom and dad are going to get separated physically. They're going to live in different homes as a result of the divorce, sometimes already are by the time the divorce starts. So now here's the setup. In this hypothetical, mom is heavily invested in her role as the primary parent.
Mm-hmm.
It almost in some cases we see is kind of how they define them. Dad has defined himself as this high-powered divorce lawyer, so he's got that, but mom and dad are at odds. They don't like each other. Maybe there's a narcissistic spouse in this and they want to punish the other. They want to control the other that they're losing in the process.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get at the other parent? Well, I get at the other parent by seeing what's the issue that really is most near and dear to them. The kids, the time with the kids.
Yeah.
And so already, just to set this up, we're not focusing at all on really what's best for the kids. Because Jordan, in that scenario, what is best for the kids? What are they losing sight of?
Right. I mean, that's a super common scenario.
I was actually
too.
asking you the question.
Oh, maybe. All right. I mean, I get they're losing sight of what the kids are used to, the historical routine, how things work. I mean, that's the answer to the question.
Right.
But that situation is like extremely common, right?
Yeah.
Is you have one person who's sort of the primary, parent, and you've got someone else who's a little less involved, but hangs out on the weekends,
And by the way, that's not commentary to suggest the mom or the dad in that scenario is any better of a parent. Or to your point earlier, that's not to say dad couldn't have them 50-50.
Right.
I mean, he might have to adjust his work schedule, maybe as a nanny. And so this is where you start to get into these questions about, like you said, the routine, the consistency, what's best for the kids. Is it best that dad have 50%, even though on a couple nights a week, we now have a nanny or grandma or someone watching where mom otherwise would be with the kids?
Yeah. And to your point, I mean, that's exactly that hypothetical is perfect. And it's a great setup because that's what opens up this one night fight. Right.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, do we lose sight of, do we care? Right. Is it two people that can say, you know what, I don't care. It's one night every 14 days, 2 nights every 14 days. If mom or dad wants to be with them on that extra night, nobody cares. But it's really when conflict comes in and those situations where it's about winning and everybody loses sight of the actual routine.
Yeah.
Then you got to start, unfortunately, like horse trading your kids.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a great setup, and that's exactly where this fight kind of comes in.
And I think where we start to inform you of what happens behind the scenes, let's be honest. Divorce lawyers, we don't work on contingencies. We don't, get a percentage of the estate. Divorce lawyers bill on the hour. So if you've got clients that say, I want 50-50, as a lawyer, a lot of these lawyers, they look at they probably in their mind are saying, that seems weird. You work 70 hours a week.
Right. You work the night shifts.
Right.
There's zero consistency.
Right. Mom's doing great with the kids. They're excelling in school. They got all these activities. They're mom's schlepping her. And you want 50-50?
Right.
But what does the lawyer say?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Dad, you're right. You're a great dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a great dad, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't I have 50-50?
Right.
Right. And the lawyer's sitting there saying, yeah, you should have it. Let's go.
Yeah.
And then what happens when we start going on that path?
Yeah. I mean, then you're fighting. Then you get a GAL and now you're in court. Now you're spending tons and tons and tons of money. And by the way, anyone looking at that type of scenario from an objective perspective is like, what are you doing? Like, this is not a guy who has 50-50. The schedule doesn't work. And by the way, it completely disregards the last to X number of years of how life has been for these
Right.
kids.
So I want to follow up one thing you said about the GAL and explain what the GAL is,
Yep,
what a 604 is here in Illinois. But I think your point is the most important point of this. You're disrupting all this, but you're disrupting your kids' routine. For what? To say, and by the way, any parent out there understands it's a fact. No matter what your schedule is, you're going to see your kids more than what the schedule provides. Why?
Totally.
Because most kids are in something.
Right.
Some kids, we get this, the kids are overscheduled. We get that in our cases, right? But the reality as parents is we also become a taxi service.
Yeah.
So if you have more than one child, there's going to come the moment, hey, can you pick up Junior from baseball practice?
Oh, yeah.
Because I got to pick up our daughter from dance class and while we're separate parts of town. Sure.
Right. And by the way, there's nothing that stops any person from going to baseball practice or seeing your kid in their activities
Games,
or
the
ice skating.
activities.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's to your point. It's like, we're really fighting about really just the sleeps.
Yeah.
You know
Where do
what I
they
mean?
sleep? So
Right,
I
where
can
do they
get a
sleep?
discount on my child support and punish the other parent.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
And I mean, yeah, it's, and like we were kind of saying, I mean, number one, and I think a good point that you've kind of raised is it's so important if you're in this situation to try to remain as objective as possible and real as possible.
Yeah.
And I think you really have to, vet your lawyer to make sure that they're not just telling you what you want to hear and giving you real advice. And if it's something where let's say you're a police officer and your schedule is 6 days on, you're working the nights and you're now overtime because there's all kinds of chaos and unrest going on. Okay.
Right.
And you said, I want 50-50 for my 7 and 9-year-old children
Yeah.
who are in school full time and have homework and other stuff. I mean, that's not a real concept.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And maybe you're creative, but it's like, and again, for the whole behind the scenes thing, it's like, that's something we pride ourselves that we don't do, right? We're not your cheerleaders, and that's not what you pay your lawyer for. You pay
Right.
for advice.
Right.
And if you have somebody who's saying, "Oh my God, go for it. Why wouldn't we? I'm a good dad." Okay, well, that's a road that you have to recognize that
Yeah.
you're going down that has a roadblock.
And I think that's the point. You have to the extent you can, step out and put your shoes in your kids' shoes just for a minute and say, man, if I was a kid, boy, I'd love to ping pong back and forth to
Right.
mom and dad's every night. Oops, I forgot my book. Oops, I forgot my hockey
Yeah.
skates. Oops, I forgot my assignment. This happens this is what we deal with as lawyers.
Yeah.
We're troubleshooting this and you're paying us a lot of money for this stuff. And so what invariably happens, and I'll tell you this because Jordan and I, on two recent cases we've resolved by us really kind of going to dad and saying, dude, what are you doing? And sometimes they're contentious conversations because they love their children. They feel entitled to at least 50% equal time. And what we found in those situations is invariably you have one parent who's just not going to give in. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's that narcissist or it's that person they feel they've been wronged,
Yep.
or the other parent cheated on them and so they're not entitled to it and that. It doesn't really matter. Whatever the reasons are, it's not logical from the perspective of what's best for the kids. And so when you realize that, we've had to have these hard conversations with clients, which I think we're saying to you, a lot of lawyers in our experience just don't do. And so they're cheering you on, like George says, they're the cheerleader at, $500, $600, $700 an hour, $900 an hour. Okay, great. But what are you getting for that other than destroying and uprooting your kids' routines? So we've had to have that pragmatic conversation. Sometimes we make light of it, and I'll be honest. So Jordan and I are both football fans, right? Sunday night, after a long weekend of running the kids here and there and this and that, we say to the dad, what would you rather do? Would you rather make sure that the kids are fed? Hey, did you get your homework done? It's due on Monday. Get your shower. Did you clip your toenails and all this other stuff? Or would you rather sit down, turn on the football game, and take a deep breath and say, man, I had a wonderful time with the kids. Had a great weekend. It was a lot of fun. I got to get myself mentally, kind of physically, emotionally ready for the work week ahead. It's a lot. Parenting is a lot. And so it really is, we have these hard conversations when we challenge, and it's not just fathers, we challenge both people, because if we had the mom, and the mom, if we get in a situation where dad's just not going to let go, he's going to get into the GAL and the 604, which I want Jordan to kind of explain what that is, because it's more time, more cost over that one night. And yes, you've been the one that's put him to bed every night. You've been the one that's, cooked their Sunday dinner and that whole routine. And there's something near and dear and very important from a nurturing standpoint for that. But if it's going to mean you're going to spend a couple $100,000 fighting for a year, 2 years, sometimes more, this is where we ask these questions of our client. Is it worth it?
Right. And it's like, is it worth it not only for the dollars and cents, but is it worth it for the conflict to continue?
Your own mental health.
Right. Your own mental health.
Yeah.
And it's like, that if we're fighting, we have a 604 and a JL, which I'll talk about in a second, but it's like, is it worth another year and a half of time and fighting about another overnight, right? The one night fight.
Right.
For your kids, whether, and it's a really hard analysis to make. And we've had, like you said, hard conversations, but the other part of this too is the inverse, right? So if, let's say you are the primary parent, right? And you got young kids and you're the one who's schlepping them all over the place. And to your point, it's like, we've got a family that's splitting, right? And that parent in that situation, there's a certain part of this that they have to learn to let go a little bit. And they have to learn and give the other parent some grace to say, look, even though you've never taken them to doctor's appointments, right? Even though you've not had a lot of time with them and, I do everything, I have to learn to let go and say, look, there's going to be time where you're going to have them. I have to trust kind of what's happening over there. I can't micromanage and sort of regulate what goes on your time, right? And so that's another, from the other side of the coin, a conversation that we have.
Right.
And it sort of comes in the same context where it's like, okay, what difference does it make if there's an extra? Does it make a difference if it's 5 overnights, 6 overnights, 7 overnights? The same concerns that you have with 1 overnight is going to be the same that you have with 5 overnights or 6, right? Yeah. So that's another genesis of that conversation, but also like, it's the inverse.
Yeah. And here's going back to the hypothetical we talked about. Here's what happens. This is what you're signing up for. And you should, as you go through this analysis, measure all this. What am I doing to my kids?
Yeah.
What am I doing? An extra night here or there, whatever.
Yep.
And again, I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying you have to look at this in the context of what happens next. So what happens next is, as a starting point, what we always try to do is to say, listen, please do not let a judge and lawyers and a guardian and 604 and all these people decide your family and what's in the best interest of your kids, because they will. If we go down that path, if we got all this stuff, you know what, we're gearing up. And this last week I literally had this issue, and I stocked up. We called my friends at C4 and I said, load up, we're going to get jacked up and we're going to trial. We're in fight mode. Okay. So what we're paid to do before we get there as a starting point, how do we get you as parents to figure this out yourself? Well, oftentimes we start with mediation.
Definitely.
Right. So mediation is a simple concept. Sometimes we do it with the lawyers.
Yeah.
Right. I don't do great in mediation. Because to me, these things, I just let's make a decision. This is not that complicated, folks. Jordan, a lot more patient. Jared, Joe, Leo, some of the people on the team, Shanna, Brittany, these are great people that do well. We can go with you. We sit with the mediator and we try to problem solve, right? Let's give and take, have that conversation. If that doesn't work and someone is hell-bent, I want 50-50 no matter what. That was like the case I had. The court's likely going to appoint the guardian ad litem, right? Or a child's rep. What does that look like? What does that do to the case? What does that cost?
Yeah, I'm going to steal something I heard you had talked to a client about the other day.
You see what's happening here? Three times I've tried to I'm giving these softballs. Like
I'm answering, no, but the answer to the question is going to be something you said that I liked.
All right, fire away.
So let's say that James represents mom and I represent dad. And James is up in front of the judge saying, oh my God, Rosenberg's client this, Rosenberg's client that. And I'm up there, well, Quigley's client this, Quigley's client that. The judge is going to shrug their shoulders and say, I don't, they're both very compelling arguments, but don't care. I have to appoint a helper, somebody who's my eyes and my ears to go figure out what the heck is going on.
Yeah.
And talk to Quigley's client, talk to Rosenberg's client and say, okay, here's all the things I'm looking at. I'm looking at, the ages of the kids, the schedules of the parties, who's done some of these things like medical appointments and extracurricular stuff, and actually make recommendations to the court. So that is always pretty much the next step if you reach an impasse.
So let me answer my own question. You gotta, because I'm just trying to break this down in simple concept. A guardian ad litem, yes, the judges see this as a helper. Oftentimes, unfortunately, we see this as a hindrance. But there's someone that a guardian ad litem or a child's representative is an attorney. That's all they are. They're an attorney. They're not psychologists, psychiatrists, but the judges bring them into cases to investigate. A guardian ad litem is usually where we have smaller kids, and they make recommendations on behalf of the kids. A child's representative is
We're
more
going technical. I got it.
well. I mean, we're trying to give them,
All right, I'm talking, we'll talk a little bigger picture. We're good. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so I'm breaking down the micro. So because these are the components of what you're going to deal with.
Right.
So there's basically another lawyer in the case, and guess who pays for it? You do.
Right.
This isn't like a court-appointed public defender. You don't get that. It's another lawyer. You know what? This lawyer, I just had a child's representative appointed in this high conflict case we just had. From January of this year until now, this child's representative billed and is going to get paid 100 cents on the dollar, ordered by the court, close to $100,000. So I'm not naming any names. I'm not saying they didn't do some work and put in time, but it's $100,000
Right off
from
the top.
January,
Yeah.
gone out of your state. And by the way, my youngest daughter's still in college. That's nowadays it's damn near a year of college, depending where you go. I mean, a little less,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I mean, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What value add was that $100,000? So that's the first thing that the courts do. Let's say the guardian ad litem then issues a report. This
Yeah.
is a lawyer's recommendation as to what they think is best for your kids.
Yeah.
One side of it says, don't care. I don't agree. You didn't give me 50-50 joint decision making. We're going on for the fight. What happens next?
Yep. Then the courts, somebody asked for a 60410B,
Which is what?
a section of a statute in the code that says the court can appoint a mental health professional, basically an expert, to come in and basically do what the GAL or child's representative did on steroids.
Yeah, on steroids. So let me give you a
steroids.
real life example of steroids. This same case, there's a psychologist gets appointed oftentimes in our division. $50,000 gone just for the report. Just for the report. Half of which was in the report itself was, here's 20 pages and let's replicate those 20 pages so it's a 50-page report. Charged and paid $50,000. So and by the way, this case also had a guardian ad litem in it.
Yep.
So you're in before anybody testifies, because if they go to a deposition, they charge. If they review your file preparing for the deposition, they charge. This evaluator wanted $15,000 for a deposition. The court shot him down on that, but think about what we're talking about between a guardian ad litem, a child's representative, and a 604 court-appointed evaluator, all of which you guys pay for.
Right.
Just that alone, you're probably in for $250,000.
Then go a step further with us, James. Let's say the guy,
60410B.
yeah, let's say somebody, well,
C, yep.
let's say one of the parties says, you know what, don't agree with the GAL, don't agree with the 60410B,
Yep.
got it wrong.
Yep.
There's another section of the statute that says that each party can get their own individual expert.
Had that
So
happen.
it's basically the B again from a different perspective.
Yep.
And there's some bias and stuff like that. But yeah, it's another person that you pay for,
Right.
to basically generate the same thing.
Yep.
And again, we had a case, we had a GAL, a 604 and a 60410C.
Yep.
That each had different recommendations in terms of the amount of overnights.
Yep.
Was it 4, 5, or 7 or 6? No, 4,
Yep.
5, 6.
Yep.
And we literally had a trial on whether there was 4 overnights, 5 overnights, or 6 overnights.
Yeah. And to give some context to why sometimes that happened. In this case, we represented a woman who was badly abused.
Yep.
And the father in that case, abusive towards our client, very manipulative, starting to be psychologically abusive to the child.
Yeah.
It was a bad case.
Yeah.
And fortunately, we were successful in basically limiting his access. The court had made recommendations in that time where our client just along the lines we're talking, we said, listen, you can fight over this issue. You've got more wins than losses, I suppose, if you look at it that way.
Yep.
Our client said, fine, let's get it done. The guy said, nope, not doing it. We went to a lengthy trial.
Yeah.
And by the way, these trials, you're gonna spend easily $100,000 paying each lawyer, probably more, right? Because just imagine in that case, if you have 3 experts, you don't get an expert done, maybe one a day. Sometimes they spill over into a second day.
Yep.
The courts you don't get to go to court and just keep on going with the same judge. More often than not, the courts will give you maybe a week,
Right.
maybe some time into the next week. And if it doesn't finish that case, remember, we also it came back to court because they kept fighting. We got shut down. We were ready to start this trial on, remember this vividly, March 16, 2020. Anybody know what happened that day?
Just a global pandemic.
Global pandemic.
Right.
We literally went to court. We had our trial boxes there,
Yep.
ready to go. We had
Wild.
opening statements, pre-trial motions.
Yep.
Judge says, we have a judges meeting this afternoon. We're going to break. I'll email everybody. The next email we got, courts are shut down. We're done.
Crazy.
That case then went on for a whole nother year before we actually got the trial. So it was years in the making. It was so much money spent.
Yep.
This is just, and some of these are extreme.
And even on a normal circumstance, though, something that's not so extreme is if you start a trial and let's say you have one expert or just a GAL,
Yep.
right? It could go 2 or 3 days. It always takes longer than it is, right? And you're lucky if you get consecutive days with a judge.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you could end trial on October 17th and the next available date could be January 9th.
A case I just had last week set for trial, settled. We started trial. It settled on the second day, and we were going to have more dates this next week. And the judge said, that's fine, but I don't have dates thereafter available until March.
Right.
So, and by the way, as lawyers, we are in the weeds on this stuff. When we go to trial, like I joked before, we got our C4 going, we're fired up. This is go time. And as competitive, athletic backgrounds, like we get into the trial aspect. I like trying cases and we are going to fight to win. But if you ask me 6 months from now for the specific details that I have fresh in my mind today and the exhibits that I know what's on this piece of paper and I know what this document says, it's just not realistic to think anyone can do that. So you ratchet up again with all that prep time. It's such a tremendous expense. And that's where what we are really getting to in the purpose of this case. And again, we've joked a little bit and we do that internally and stuff, but we really want you all to think about this. Before you're about to spend years of your children's college tuition, or money that will go directly into your pocket. To do what? To disrupt your children from the normal routine that they've always had during the marriage. Pause and think about this stuff. Think about, am I doing this because this is really necessary to protect my children's best interest? Maybe it is. Sometimes it is. Sometimes we have those cases. But the reason we really wanted to talk about this, because so often we have these cases and we're sitting here scratching our head saying, like, are we literally fighting over Sunday night? And like Jordan said, think about it. 2 Sunday nights over the course of a month times 12, you're talking 24 overnights over the course of the year, which is really what? It's the period of time from, and we did the math on this, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you normally bring the kids home at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, usually 6 o'clock, so they can have dinner with the custodial parent or whatever. But either way, kids go to bed, 9 o'clock, depending on their age, maybe 10 o'clock.
Right.
So you have 3 hours you're fighting over, 3 hours, because otherwise they're asleep. And by the way, you're signing on for the joy, which I used to love, waking kids up, getting ready for school. Who doesn't love that? It's a favorite time. Kids are so cooperative. They bounce right out of bed.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Right.
So you're fighting over 3 hours, 6 hours a month, 6 hours a month times 12 months. It's down to hours of
Right.
time. And versus the disruption to the kids, the crisis the kids get embroiled in, right? We've seen that where the fight between mom and dad over this stuff, it cascades down on the kids. Mom and dad are fighting in front of kids, swearing in front of kids, physically the altercations in front of the kids.
Yep.
And we just said, what are you doing?
Yep.
So think about some of these issues before you really dig your heels in and say, I'm not going to give or I'm not going to compromise.
Right. And I mean, and that's really that's in a contested context, right? I mean, the other school of thought is to say, okay, if you can have that conversation with your soon to be ex, like, what are we really fighting about, and try to nip it in the bud, right?
Yeah.
And does it make sense to drop off at school and actually do the overnight? Does
Yeah.
it matter? Does
Yeah.
it make sense for the kids? And I mean, these are always just really, really, I mean, this is such a prevalent conversation
Yeah.
with us. I mean,
Yeah.
every case with kids, it's always, where do you start? What's the position? What's reasonable? And it's always this assessment, this cost benefit to say, what are we really fighting about? Is it worth it? And if it is, then you have to at least know all the risks
Yeah.
and the cost going into it.
And we're not unsympathetic to the reality of divorce and how emotionally traumatic it is. And these concepts to us that objectively are very simple. They're very real. We've even tried in some cases where we said, you know what? If we suspect that it's about a parent wanting, as Jordan said about the formula, to pay less child support, maybe we'll talk to our client and say, you know what? Let's agree to less child support. Yes, you're entitled to it. Yes, you'll get it if we fight over it. But the amount of money you're going to spend to save $500 a month, say, off the child support over the course of the next 6 years of the kids' lives, you could never, the kids would have to you pay child support until the kids are 30 to recoup the litigation costs.
Right.
And you get out of this, you move on, you don't disrupt the kids. So we try to be creative. But our, we just felt compelled to do this conversation with you guys to just give you that perspective. This happens all the time. Some of you might be watching this and say, wow, that's me. I'm in that right now. Look at what this is doing to your kids. Look at what that extra, 24 overnights a month, how does it benefit? How does it not? You're better off, in our opinion, getting out of the process, having some ability to actually work with your spouse after the divorce to where one parent could say, hey, listen, I got this work thing. Can the kids stay with you tonight? Sure. Hey, I'm going to this conference. Could you watch them this? Sure. Hey, you know what? It's Columbus Day. Our office is closed. Would you mind if I kept the kids overnight Sunday night and just because they're off school and we hang out? I'd like to take them to the museum or something. Sure. I mean, a lot of this stuff is aspirational, and so we're not unrealistic, but just make sure before you decide to fight this fight, to spend the kind of money you're going to spend, make sure you're having these real conversations with your lawyers. Because if they're not telling you the things we're telling you now, you might want to ask why they're not. And it may not be because they're necessarily focused on the best interest of your kids. So as always, if you guys ever have any questions, if you're in the middle of something like this, you're thinking about this, and maybe you're contemplating a custody battle, or someone saying you should or you shouldn't, give us a call. Call us anytime. We're happy to consult with you. You can go to our website, www.beermannlaw.com. James Quigley, Jordan Rosenberg. We've tried many, many custody disputes. We have the experience. We can give you our perspective, help you out in any way. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And feel free to reach out to us anytime.